Hey, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us again for another episode of Mind Your Body and Soul, the healthiest podcast that you've ever heard in your entire life. I am Joseph Ward, and of course, I co-host this with my good man, Mr. Mathias Sweet. Now, COVID surge have happened, and he's a part of our COVID testing team. So he's out there doing his testing. So don't think he's just slacking off out here. He's out there testing, making sure people are healthy. So give a shout out to Mathias. But remember, Mind Your Body and Soul is a educational podcast that focuses on all things health related to help our listeners learn more about the various health topics and information they may or may not have access to. We seek to inform, empower, uplift, and mobilize our listeners to become the healthiest versions of themselves. And you can catch us every Wednesday on our website at www.nmcpodcast.com, as well as our parent website at www.neighborhoodmedicalcenter.org. We're also available on podcast platforms such as Anchor, Breaker, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and we're also available right here on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video, share this video, and you're going to learn some things. And if you have any comments or questions, put those down in the comment section, because we do want to communicate with you, because we have a great one today. So this gentleman that we're interviewing today has over 40 years of experience in working in the pharmaceutical industry, specifically working with HIV medicines. He was around with the launch of AZT. He's helped launch newer HIV drugs that help improve people's conditions and help people live longer and even become what we call zero, or get to zero, where a person's T or HIV cell count is so low that they can't transmit it to another person. He's worked with ViiV Healthcare for over 40 years. He's dedicated himself. We've learned a lot from him. We've been able to work with this gentleman for, I want to say, at least the last 6 to 7 years, coming into town of Tallahassee. Even when I was with the health department and out with Neighborhood Medical Center, we've been able to work with him, grow. We love him and his team because they've definitely been an asset to us. So, Mr. Steve Mikell, welcome to Mind Your Body and Soul.
Thank you very much, Joe, and Mathias, whenever you join.
Yes, sir. Thank you for being here with us, because we've had a lot of conversations about you, and they've all been great, but we've all marveled at your dedication, your commitment, and just how you go about doing your job and helping to make sure that we have a better understanding of the medicines that we're using with our patients. Just being able to sit down and have realistic, real world conversations with you have been beneficial over the years. So I do want you to know that we cherish you, and we thank you for all that you've brought to our industry, to our agency, to our city. You greatly helped us be able to improve the living conditions of a lot of the patients that we see on a regular basis. So definitely thank you for all that you've done.
Well, thank you, Joe. And I also want to flip that around and thank you guys for all the hard work that you guys put in. You're there for all the patients, and I've always looked at what I do as I'm an information source. And so by giving out the information to healthcare practitioners and to case managers, workers that work directly with the patients, I'm hoping that I've always tried to keep the patients at the forefront of everything I do, and right. So I want to make sure that the things that I say, the things that we do, the programs that we support are beneficial for the patients, bottom line, and that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and they definitely have, because we've been able to collaborate and be in the rooms with our patients and seeing the light bulbs go off because they understand the information because the way it was given. So that's one thing I've definitely been able to learn from you guys, just how to understand the information better and deliver it better. So thank you again. But now I know about you because we've we've been able to build a friendship over the years and have several conversations, but our audience is not as familiar with you. So can you give them some background information about yourself and your view of HIV prevention management using pharmaceutical drugs?
Sure. Well, as you stated earlier, I have over 40 years of experience. I started out, and it's with actually the same company, through mergers and everything. The name of the company has changed, but I did start out at December 1st, 1980 with a company called Burroughs Welcome. And then mid-90s, we merged with Glaxo and became Glaxo Welcome. And then in early 2000s, we merged with SmithKlineBeechum, became GlaxoSmithKline. And then we went into a joint venture with Pfizer Pharmaceuticals with their HIV division. And together, GSK or GlaxoSmithKline and Pfizer formed what's today known as ViiV Healthcare. And we are the only, and I'm not trying to toot ViiV's horn, I want to try to make it, universal throughout as far as pharmaceutical companies go. But we are the only one that is totally dedicated to HIV treatment and prevention. And so that's, all of our drugs that are in any of our pipelines are all dedicated for HIV. And by that, I mean, we don't have anything for hepatitis C, no antibiotics, that type of thing. All that's with the parent company, GlaxoSmithKline. So,
right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I see the dog trying to make an appearance as well. Yeah. That's cool. So and what's interesting is when I started working in HIV/AIDS prevention in 2009, the only drug I knew about at that time was AZT. Now I wasn't really familiar, but I knew it by name, and I knew this was the drug that was predominantly given to people living with HIV. But just trying to get an understanding from you when you first started working in this field and they were introducing you to these drugs and how these things go. But what was just the culture and the atmosphere at that time? It's 1980. I'm not even born. I'm wishing I was, but I'm not even born. But just saying the culture of America, but also the culture of the pharmaceutical industries trying to produce these new medicines for people.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I hope I don't too long-winded here, but
no, you're okay.
Basically, I started, like I said, in 1980, and Burroughs Welcome was a company that had a wide array of drugs. I mean, we called them virtually every specialty. We had Sudafed, Actifed, Neosporin, Cordyceporin, all of these, drugs. Ceftriaxone it's an antibiotic. We had Xyloprim for gout. We had, you name it. We had it, and so I was used to calling on every specialty. And at the time, as far as from the industry perspective, our biggest competition, our biggest threat at that time was generics. Drugs were just coming out, and of course they've taken on a totally different. Pretty much everybody's familiar with generics and the industry as well. So shortly after I started with the company, we actually came up with a drug for herpes. There was nothing to treat herpes at that time. So we came out with Zovirax in 1981, and then it progressed to finally getting. We had the oral, the ointment first, and the IV, and then the oral capsules in 1984. So we were pretty much looked upon as kind of the experts in antivirals. So step back a little. In 1981, that was when they were actually identifying. They had patients that were dying from unknown origins, diseases that they hadn't seen. They were kind of diseases that weren't expected in young people, like that were dying from these. So they actually were able to isolate and find the virus. And at the time, they called it HTLV3, which was human, and it was later. It was called the human T lymphocytic virus type 3, and then it was later renamed HIV, which was human immunodeficiency virus, which is what it's known as today. Back then, everybody referred to it as AIDS because patients who, and as you know, and I know, AIDS is not a virus, it's actually a diagnosis. And you only get that when you're advanced HIV. A lot of patients who have HIV have never had AIDS,
Right.
or
Exactly.
been diagnosed as AIDS. So, but back then they talked about AIDS, and some of the slang terms for the virus were gay man's disease, because that was the population that was affected early on with the virus. I mean, almost exclusively. And they also called it Slim's disease, because most patients were actually lost a lot of weight.
Yes.
And so there was a lot of that going on. And unfortunately, because of those slang terms and the population at the time that this virus was prevalent in, there was a stigma attached to HIV. And I don't believe we've not quite gotten over that even today. Right. So it's important to know that and know the origins and where it came from. But as a company, like I mentioned before, we were kind of looked on as some of the experts in antivirals. I can recall when we were promoting Zovirax for herpes, going around and actually educating some of the doctors on viruses versus antibiotics. In other words, so there was a difference there. But Burroughs Welcome had actually, we didn't discover AZT. That drug was actually formulated first in 1964 by, and what the reason that it was looked at is companies were looking for drugs that would go against the retroviruses. They were thinking that retroviruses at the time may have been the cause to some cancers that were prevalent in people, but that didn't really formulate, and so the drug was never processed any further. So sometime in the late 70s, Burroughs Welcome took that drug. It was never patented, and we started looking at it for some antibacterial properties, and it did kind of show some activity there, but again, nothing that we could really find a use for. But since we had it on the shelf and it was kind of a reformulated form, we decided to look at it now that this virus has been identified, and it was identified as a retrovirus. So we actually, at the time, the only place that you could get drugs tested was at the NIH. So we had to send our drug and actually I think we sent several other formulations to the NIH to see, if they were active against the virus, because they actually had the live virus that you could test it against. And so they sent back word immediately that AZT looked very promising, was very active. And we already knew through some of our early human trials that it was pretty well tolerated. In other words, it wasn't a drug that, once you took it, you had some adverse effects. Right. So by doing that, what we actually were able to do was get into human trials much quicker. So go back and realize that even though people were suffering from this disease before 81, it was identified in 81. And fast forward to 84, we sent it to the NIH. 86, we started the clinical trials. 87, the drug was approved. The reason that it was approved on this fast track was that the one study that they did on the drug, and most drugs when they come to market have 2 or 3 major clinical trials, and they look at everything from how adverse events as far as efficacy. They want to make sure it's effective, but also is it well tolerated. And so those are called phase 1 trials, where they try to test the tolerability. Phase 2 is they see that it's active, and then phase 3 you have usually 2 or 3. Well, we moved immediately into phase 3 because people were dying from this virus, and so they actually, the study that they had 145 patients that they put on AZT, and these were all AIDS patients. I mean, they were diagnosed with AIDS. 137 were put on placebo. It was a sugar pill. It's the only study ever done with a placebo. You couldn't do that anymore, obviously. But one patient out of the 145 on AZT died at 4 months. This study was scheduled to go through 6 months, and 19 of the 137 on placebo died. So that was proof enough to stop the study early, and we submitted for FDA approval and received it on March 19th, 1987. So you're talking basically 6 years from the time it was identified till we actually had something to use.
Right.
So now that's the history of that, but you know, some of the drawbacks and things that we learned retrospectively. One thing is the dose of this drug was it came in a 100 milligram capsule, and we knew that the serum half-life of AZT, by that that's how long the drug should be active, was only 3 hours. So we thought it should be given every 4 hours around the clock. And they were given 200 milligrams every 4 hours around the clock. So total daily dose of 1,200. People had set a timer, get up in the middle of the night, take the medicine.
Right.
Because we didn't want the levels to fall down low enough. And we didn't understand a lot about resistance at the time, but we didn't want that to occur. Well, you know, not knowing, and we knew a few years later that was too high of a dose. They had about 40% of the patients that experienced anemia, where they had to you know, have that, you know, with transfusions and that kind of thing. So around 1990, we actually came out with a 250 milligram tablet, and the dose then was 250 milligrams twice a day for a total daily dose of 500 milligrams, which was a lot less. And then the anemia dropped down to about 10%.
Right.
So just that's kind of the
Right.
history and how it started. But yeah, and I mean, I was there for the launch of AZT. And
so the scientist in me, like I'm loving that with the breakdown. But so did they have to any point during the trials to go back and kind of tweak the ingredients in the AZT to kind of make it more palatable to humans? Yeah.
Like I said, you know, the original formulation, we had actually changed that. Burroughs Welcome did from what it was originally formulated in 1964. Right. And we were actually looking at it, like I said, as an antibacterial drug. And so we had some human trials already. So that was the reformulated form of it. Now, after it was released, you know, knowing, and the reason that we were able to go to from every 4 hours to every 12 hours is that they realized that even though the serum, you know, the amount of time it stayed in the blood was only 4 hours, the intracellular half-life, in other words, the active part of the drug, what it's doing in the cells, was more like 12 to 14 hours. So we were able to reduce the dose. So by doing both of those things, you could say that helped out tremendously with the tolerability. Right. But the formulation of the drug, we did actually reformulate it a little bit, or we actually got shortcuts. Initially, it took 17 different steps to formulate this drug. That's why it was so, and that was one of the negative parts of AZT coming out was the cost. And it cost about $8,000 a year at the time, which was a lot of money, you know, back then. And so we got you know, as a company, we were thinking we're helping to save people's lives, but we got a lot of negative publicity saying that we're trying to benefit from, and that's understandable. And, you know, looking back on it, the activism that was going on at the time, you know, was a must. And because of those early people who were activists in, you know, fighting the government to get funding for these drugs, as well as you know, pharmaceutical companies making sure that they were being responsible to people, that laid the groundwork for what's going on today, and the patients that are today benefiting from, you know, all of the advances that have been made, you know, from a medical standpoint, as well as from support, I guess is the best way you can say.
Gotcha. Now, once again, it's all interesting. because I love when we have our drug rep meetings and we're learning about different components and how the medicines work and how they've been improved. Like that stuff gets my wheels spinning. So I'm hoping others who feel the same way are just reeling off this, because you've given that good history and you were actually there to witness it. That's one of the best parts about it. So do have this question. Okay. A young Steve. How does the young Steve decide to work in the pharmaceutical industry and specifically get in HIV medicines?
Yeah. Well, that kind of just happened. I was with the company and that kind of happened. But I actually started right out of college. While I was a senior, I grew up in Gainesville. I'm a native Floridian. My parents on both sides, as far back as you want to look, are native Floridian. So, but my senior year in college, I was actually I was coaching the 9th grade basketball team as well as the JV and helping out with the varsity at Gainesville High School. And so one of the dads that had a son on my 9th grade team worked for Burroughs Welcome, and he came up to me, knew I was going to be graduating, and wanted to know if I wanted to interview to go to work for them. And I'd never heard of the company, so I said, sure. I want a job when I get out. And that led from there. And one thing that he's always told me, and he was really a legend. He called on Shands Hospital in Gainesville, but one of the things that he said was that there's very few jobs out there that you actually get paid to call on your friends. And that stuck with me throughout my whole career. And I always think of you guys, as well as most of the doctors and healthcare practitioners I call on. They're actually my friends. I look forward on them, and that's the thing I will miss. As you know, I just recently retired, so yes. But it's the part I will miss is that. So I'll try to stay in touch with everybody as much as I can. Yes. But that's how I got my start. It was just serendipity. I wasn't thinking about being. My degree was in business administration. Nothing scientific, even though I took the normal sciences everybody takes. But the thing is, they can bring you in and teach you just like any other job. Right. Teach you the basic science and the things that you need to know. So that's how I got my start. And then as far as getting into the HIV, and it's interesting, and I was telling my wife this morning, is that everybody, when the AZT first came out, was selling it. Mm-hmm. Then they pared it down to where only one person in each district would kind of go out of their own territory and just call them the high level doctors and kind of an expertise level. And I did that. And then in '95, we just before the merger with Glaxo, we actually formed an oncology HIV sales force, and I was part of that. And then just a further thing, which is kind of a little different, but in '99, we actually had a sales force that it called on corrections. So I did that from @99 to 2011. All I did was called on correctional facilities and state level as far as, but at one point I was covering 5 states. Wow. So,
that's a lot of travel.
Yeah. So, but that's kind of my history there, But I've really had a heart for HIV, and being there on the forefront, seeing the changes, and it's been kind of nice to talk to a lot of the practitioners that have been out and been around it that long. Right. And we forget how tough it was early on.
Yes, definitely. Now, what's also interesting is, so my mom is from Gainesville.
Yep.
So her whole side of the family is from Gainesville. So you coaching at Gainesville High School, it's a good chance you coach somebody in my family, because we produce a lot of athletes. So somebody who played basketball.
Talk about that.
Yeah, I know. We got to sit down and connect the dots. Yeah, because we love football, basketball, track and field, wrestling and things. And so, yeah, we do have to talk about that. Yes, sir. So you've explained AZT to us. But there, I learned about the ViiV launching another drug called Epivir in 1995. So how is Epivir compared to AZT, and what does it does?
Yeah.
Or what does it do different from AZT? Right?
Yeah. If you think about, and I know a lot of your listeners probably know all about the life cycle of the HIV virus, and I don't want to get too technical with it, but the bottom line is what this virus does is it can't replicate itself. You know,
right.
That's why you can see it if you put the virus on a chair, it's going to die.
Right.
But when it's in the human body, it actually it attaches to the T cells or CD4 cells, which they're later called, which is part of the immune system. It's the part that actually alerts the body that there's something going on.
Right.
And it activates all of it's part of the white cells, but it activates all of the macrophages and all these things to go attack whatever is there. So if you don't have that, what they call helper cell being active, the immune system doesn't know there's something going on. And
right.
so when people got this virus, they weren't dying from HIV directly. They were dying from every other thing that's living in their body, or maybe they were exposed to that's attacking them. And the worst culprit was what they call PCP or Pneumocystis. It was a pneumonia that patients would get. And that's most of the time how patients presented early on when they were diagnosed. They would be in the hospital, they'd have a really bad cough and everything, and it was just really, and some patients would end up dying from it. And we had a drug called Sceptra DS, Bactrim DS is the same thing, that was used to treat that, and it was very effective. And then they started trying to prophylax for those things. So to get back to your original question, Epivir and AZT were in the same class of drugs. They were called what are called reverse transcriptase inhibitor. So in the CD4 cell, you've got several enzymes that actually change. Being a retrovirus, what happens is there's a proviral RNA that's injected into the CD4 cell, and then it's converted to DNA. And so it's done in a reverse way. I think I got that right. It might be the opposite.
Yep. No, that's right. Yeah.
DNA to RNA. But anyway, it does it different from normal cells, and it's reversed. But it uses that enzyme, reverse transcriptase, to actually do that step. So when AZT was introduced, it actually blocked that replication.
Right.
Well, there's certain building blocks. You've got adenine, thymidine, cytosine, and guanine. So those 4 building blocks that make up the DNA chain. And so AZT, it actually blocked the thymine, and then 3TC blocked cytosine. So they were, even though they were working in the same place, they were actually just stopping one of the different building blocks that are different. And so, that's when we came out with that. And then there was a couple of other drugs that were actually introduced before Epivir came out that were in the same class. In other words, until the protease inhibitors in '96 came out, there was only one class of drugs. And we know now that once the protease inhibitors came out, then they came out with what they call the drug cocktail, or heart therapy, which was highly active antiretroviral therapy. And that's when patients really, truly started what they call it now, living with HIV versus dying from HIV. And it truly did. I mean, the death rate, instead of going up, it dropped down to almost 0. And that was a huge, but it was a combination of these drugs. And by using a protease inhibitor and a reverse transcriptase inhibitor, you were hitting the virus at 2 different sites in the life cycle.
Right.
And we realized that is very important, because within a certain class of drugs, you can get what they call cross resistance. And so you may build up a resistance to one, and then shortly it's going to come to the other one. But if you're coming from 2 different classes, then there's less chance of that occurring.
Right. Yeah. So, and this is the things you're talking about is some of my favorite parts of learning and talking about it, because that life cycle, I spend a lot of time looking at the life cycle and just how the different medicines block the duplication or the replication of the HIV virus in the white blood cell, because this medicine was able to stop it at this point in the life cycle. And so those, I can say that's one of my favorite parts. So what are some other medicines that came out over time when you looked at these medicines and was like, I think this one is going to be good. I can understand what this one. And how did you go about explaining these medicines to either the companies you were representing or even the patients they may have had you speak to?
Well, that's all part of the evolution of HIV. In fact, there are 7, if you want to term it, 7 separate classes of drugs out there right now, currently. And I can run through those if you want real quick.
That's fine. Yes, sir.
Okay, so the very first one was nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, which was AZT, Epivir, DDI, D4T, Zygen, you name all of these drugs. Then the protease inhibitors came out, and the most current one now. I mean, there was 5 or 6. We had one that's probably, I don't even think we make it anymore, because it's just, as these drugs get better, they they just kind of fall away from usage, and because there's better drugs, and that's one point that I would like to make. And the main thing is that the patients listen to you guys, and particularly to their healthcare practitioner, because even though they may think they're doing well on what they're on, there are advances being made every day.
Right.
And so if a physician or you guys say, hey, you might ask your doctor about this, there are new advances, and they're not saying that you're failing whatever you're on, but the new drug that you're being put on is better for you.
Right.
And I say that because the doctors think, talking about you particularly, you may be doing well on what you're on, but they know that down the road, what you're on may actually cause some long-term bad effects that you don't have. And, the ultimate goal is to stay undetectable.
Right.
What we talk about, or stay zero. But the bottom line is, let's do that with as little harm to the body. And that's the advances that these drugs have made, is that as they have come about, one, they've lowered the pill burden, and now you can even get an injection where you don't have to worry about even taking pills.
Yes.
So we've come all the way from giving 2 AZTs every 4 hours around the clock to now giving an injection or 2 injections every other month, to treat the virus. And some people, and me personally, I'm on several different meds for hypertension and different things like that, and I don't mind taking medicine every day, but I don't have HIV. And if I had that constant reminder of taking this, and did I remember to take my medicine, whereas now, that can actually be wiped out. And in the studies from what I understand that they did, 9 out of 10 patients that were in there seemed to prefer that versus the taking orally. But let's just go. And then the new non-nucleosides came out, reverse transcriptase inhibitors. Now they worked in the same area as the reverse transcriptase, but they were a different class, so there wasn't the cross resistance there. Then they had fusion inhibitors, and that was for really patients who had failed almost everything, and that actually prevented the virus from gaining access into the CD4 cell.
Right.
Then he had co-receptor antagonist. That was like the cell's entry. Again, did very similar to what the fusion inhibitors did. Then what I think is the major, now protease inhibitors kept patients living. They weren't very well tolerated, especially early on. But the integrase strand transfer inhibitors, those you know, they work on the middle part of the life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
They actually prevent the DNA from actually being incorporated into that CD4 cell. So if that doesn't happen, that virus dies right there.
Right.
So they have made the biggest impact, seem to be the most potency, the best tolerated, less chance of resistance forming. They've really made a huge difference, especially the newer generation ones, in the virus life cycle.
Exactly.
And then the last one, and I had the pleasure of actually, it's only drug in there, but was called an attachment inhibitor. Now,
yes,
the ones that prevent it from actually getting into the CD4 cells, this does that too, but this doesn't even allow the virus. It's the only drug that actually works on the virus. So it prevents it from even attaching to the CD4 cell.
Right.
So the end result of that, what we think is that you've got a lot better recovery of the CD4 cells then. And but that one also is used when there's multiple resistance that has formed. So there are that many. Just take a look at these. There were in 2020 there were 37.6 million people living with HIV, and the death rate is 690,000 people died in 2020 from HIV or related to HIV.
Right.
In 10 years earlier, in 2010, 1.2 million died. Now, you know that there are more people with HIV, living with HIV today than there were, but the death rate has dropped in half.
Yes.
And that's advances and better health care and getting patients to their practitioner, spreading the word about, you know, hey, there's a better drug out there to use, you know, now. So
right. So could just for clarity purposes, for somebody who's watching who may not be fully aware of the jargon we're using, can you explain what the drug resistance is and how it works?
Thank you. That's yeah, and that was very important with AZT when it first came out. We didn't understand a lot about resistance. We knew antibiotics. You know, if you gave too many antibiotics, you can get resistance. We didn't think it was the same thing with viruses, but it turns out it is. What happens is with all these drugs are going to work, especially if you take what they call wild type virus. By that, what I mean is that original virus that has not seen any drug pressure. As you know, as you get resistance, you get mutations of the virus.
Right.
Kind of like this COVID thing, you know.
Exactly.
You know, as it's advancing, you're getting so. So what happens is when you don't have enough pressure on the virus with the drugs that you're taking, and by that what I'm saying is if you're only on one medicine, then what happens is the virus is smart. It causes certain, it has mutations that occur naturally, and what happens is that the drug pressure kills down the wild type part, but these mutations that formulate, you know, they now become the dominant virus, and then the drug doesn't work anymore, and then that resistant virus can be passed on to someone else, and so then when they try to use that original drug, it doesn't work then. But the idea with using multiple drugs at multiple sites, the heart, highly active antiretroviral therapy, is that they put enough pressure on the virus to keep it below detectable level. And if it stays there, there's virtually zero chance, because remember, it makes mistakes, the virus does. So the less count of the virus, the fewer of those mistakes that are made, and they're just not going to become dominant. So you're not going to get that's the way I can understand it. So I hope that's helpful. And that, you know, so that's the advances that we've made. You know, I mentioned that patients started living with HIV, not dying from, but they didn't have the best life because they were taking, I mean, literally handfuls of medications. They were, you know, we had our first protease inhibitor we had was called Agenerase, and you had to take they were large capsules,
Mm-hmm.
three times a day. That was just one drug, and then you had to combine that with a backbone, and it worked well, but that was just so much medicine there
Yes.
to have to take, and side effects were worse back then. Luckily, the advances that have been made is they've gone to single tablet therapy, usually with 3 or 4 drugs in there.
Mm-hmm.
And now they've got it down to just single tablet with just 2 medicines. And really and truly, all of this new drugs coming out are all 2 drug regimens.
Right.
So, and the injectable that we talked about earlier, that's 2 drugs.
Right. Yeah.
So.
That the evolution of it has been amazing to me. But like you say, I think about it. I have trouble swallowing pills, just period. I've always been that person. Try to give me some Tylenol or something, you need to crush it up. But also, as my knowledge grew about HIV and the medicines, so if it was me and I was taking the medicines and I can't swallow, but I need to crush it up, that decreases the integrity of it. And so I would have been in the issue, like, we either gonna have to learn how to swallow this, that, but then it makes you not want to take the drug. So when things become smaller in size, but also now the injectables, that will make more people or help more people be consistent about taking their medicines, or even want to take their medicines, because I don't have to force myself to do anything.
True. And you bring up a really good point, but one of the things too that a lot of people don't think about is that when there's a lot of these drugs that you mentioned about crushing the pills, some of them you can't crush because they actually have a coating on them that releases the drugs at certain, it's kind of like a timed release type mechanism. So if you crush those, you get rid of that, and it messes up the integrity. There are also drugs that you have to take with food, some that you have to take without food, and the reasons for that is that the acid in the stomach has to be at a certain level to cause these drugs to be available to the body to be absorbed. Now, one of the injectables that's in that 2-drug injectable, actually you have to take it with food when you're taking it orally. But that goes, and you have to watch out for antacids and anything that's going to interfere with the acid in your stomach. So, but by giving it as an injection, that all goes away. You don't have to worry about that anymore. Right. It's just one of the possible advantages that you may see down the road with certain things. And there's other long-acting injectables and that other companies are working on and are coming out with. So so there's a lot of good things coming down the pipe.
Yes. But and the main thing that we covered here today is the evolution and improvement of the medicines given to people who are living with HIV/AIDS, and people who are living with HIV/AIDS are actually living long, healthy lives. It was either a video I was watching or an event I was at, but it was 2 or 3 people who were, thank God they lived long enough. They were some of the people who've taken AZT, but they've been able to live long enough, and now they're on the new drugs, and they're just talking about their experience. But being able to see someone from the AZT days who's still alive, that just show you that the medicines do work. The system, systems have to also help the medicine. So you guys can provide the medicines. We're providing the patients. We meet everybody in the middle, but we have to make sure we give the correct information and the correct patient care to help the patients actually consistently take their medicines to consistently improve their health.
Exactly. And that's kind of, everybody has a role. You're trying to make sure that patients understand what they're taking and that they're hooked up to support, wherever they can, if it's housing or whatever you need. And that's probably the most important role I think out there. My role was to work with you to try to help, educate patients, and through you guys, and we have people who can talk directly to patients. We're kind of restricted in what we, as a representative, can, talk directly to a patient. And the one thing, even when people that we have, like nurses or physicians, and patients a lot of times will ask questions, and they always tell them, in general, this is the answer to that question. We're not talking about you. But if you have a question, you need to talk to your practitioner, your healthcare practitioner. And I can't stress that enough, that through you guys helping to interpret, because sometimes the communication is not quite there, but they need to trust this doctor. And if they have a question, ask it. Go in with a list of questions.
Yes.
As things come up, write it down.
Yes.
You're part, the patients are part of their healthcare as well. And believe me, doctors, doctors, healthcare practitioners want educated patients. If they don't want educated patients, go find another healthcare practitioner. I mean, that's the bottom line. Because there are some older doctors that, oh, it's my way, or, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But patients need to have buy-in, and they need to understand why the doctor wants to change their medication. Right. Understand that there's got to be a reason. So if they can supply that reason, then, hopefully through your educating and the practitioner's education, then that'll help them.
Yes, but it's like between you, Jeff, Tammy, and just a host of other representatives that we've been able to build with over the years, my knowledge base about the drugs, but also the way I can explain and communicate the drugs has improved, because I have a working knowledge of it. So when we sit down in these meetings, and if I don't understand it and I could ask you, if you can break it down to me in simple terms, okay, well, now I understand it. Now I can break it down to somebody in simple terms, because we could be dealing with people whose education levels aren't that significant. And we're doing HIV testing in the middle of a neighborhood, and somebody comes up and asks a question about a drug that you might not think these people in this neighborhood might not know. Well, guess what? They do know. And now I need to be able to explain this information. But once again, you guys have played a vital role in helping us to gain that type of education. So once again, thank you for that.
No, thank you. And I, like I said again, I can't emphasize enough that patients listen to you guys. You guys are there to help them.
Right.
That's your job, but you have it's more than a job to you. You care deeply about those patients. With Steeple is the same way. I mean, I can't think of a more caring healthcare practitioner than she is. I mean, I just wish all doctors were like that.
Exactly. But so this last question, what message do you have for people who may be HIV positive, or may be caring for somebody, or living in the same vicinity as somebody who's HIV positive, but they're skeptical about the pharmaceutical industry, social media, all these things here. Have a lot of people looking at, big pharma and all these things, but you have people who are skeptical of the pharmaceutical industry, but they're using HIV drugs. So, or they may know somebody who needs the drug. So what message would you have for that person to help them get over the skepticism?
Well, I mean, like I said, when we talked about earlier, I've got over 40 years with the company. I know, now I may have some issues internally with how this company or that company promotes their drugs,
right?
Or whatever. I think that, hey, we ought to be doing this instead of that,
right?
But bottom line is, I know these drugs work, and I've seen it, and I've heard it from physicians, and I've seen the studies. These drugs are well studied now. It's not like in the AZT day, and let's face it, we had to get something out for the patients. It's kind of like, when we had started with COVID, and, I can remember thinking, how long is it going to be? How long are we going to be with this virus before we finally get a vaccine? Well, when they came, I thought that was great, because we're going to finally get a handle on this. Well, not quite worked out that way, but I think it's made a huge impact in that disease. Well, same thing. AZT was the first thing, and it helped a lot of patients. And you mentioned I met a patient 3 or 4 years ago that was in the original AZT trials, and she was still living. I mean, she was basically my age.
Yes.
I was pretty young when it started, but she's still alive. And of course, she's not on just AZT anymore.
Right.
She's on other things, but there are those patients from way back when that, I mean, let's face it, they were taking whatever they could, whatever the physician to stay alive.
Right.
Patients now, and this is kind of a quote that I picked up. HIV treatment and pharmaceutical focus has gone from saving patients' lives to now meeting their needs, and that's where we're at. All of these drugs work. The ones that are currently in regular usage, they all work.
Right.
But does it fit their need, and does it fit that individual patient's need? And several things I would suggest. If someone, it's kind of like if you hire somebody to put a roof on your house. You don't just hire the first person out there. You get several people come in and tell you things about it, and then they may say you can go to this person, this person, this person. They list 5 or 6 people. Go talk to them and see what a good job we did or whatever. Well, same thing with a treatment in HIV. If someone's not as skeptical about the pharmaceutical industry, they can talk to you. If they don't believe you or their doctor, then maybe they can talk to some patients that are out there that are currently being treated.
Right.
I saw that work in the correctional facility because their patients don't trust anybody in a white coat. I don't care how dedicated that person is.
Yeah.
They don't trust them.
Right.
So we actually had a program which was kind of a peer educational program, and within a certain compound, and I mostly called on state facilities. So within a compound, there was always that one person that everybody knew. You go to him if you have a question. And it was another inmate, but that person, luckily we were able to give them the right information, and they said, they were able to talk and they understood and they listened to that person, whereas they wouldn't necessarily listen to somebody in authority. I guess. So long way around, but to answer your question is that I know that these companies are dedicated to coming out with newer, better treatments that meet the patient's needs. Prevention, I mean, we haven't really even talked about that, but it's going now from a tablet to, again, a long-term injection. So, they can get a shot every other month, just one, and that'll help prevent the virus. So, and that's shown to be more effective than just taking the pills. When you're taking the pills, you have to remember to take those. If you don't have the disease, you're trying to prevent it, you maybe don't think about taking that all the time,
Right.
So again, it takes that step out of there. So, bottom line is, I can say till I'm blue in the face to trust, your healthcare provider, trust Joe, trust Mathias.
Yeah.
But, if there's somebody that you could actually refer to them to, or they know with it, say, hey, do you know anybody that's being treated now? And that, so I think that makes, go ask them about it. Ask them, what do you think? So
yes.
Does that help?
Yes, definitely does. Because we building trust, because yes, your healthcare provider is supposed to have this information as a professional, but also us as healthcare providers and outreach workers, we have to also understand we have to build people's trust. We have to gain their trust, because you talked about identifying the gatekeepers. Now, the gatekeeper not going to talk to me just because I work for this organization. So how do you build friendships? You're literally building friendships in the community to help people help themselves. Think about it like that. Building friendships.
That's it.
And if we can
Those
do
are
that,
your friends. Those are your friends.
Exactly.
Just like what I talked about before.
Exactly.
I get paid to call on my friends. Well, you know what? You're there to help them, and it's more than a job to you.
Right.
That's bottom line. And I think people sense that of you, Joe, and I know there's in Mathias the same way.
Oh yeah.
And Miss Steeple, she would probably, be seeing patients without, any. It's just.
See, Mathias and Steeple are two people you have to save from themselves because they will overwork themselves. And you just have to remind them, look, okay, I admire your dedication, but we need you for the next day and the next day. So really back. Yes.
Yeah,
but
kind of
definitely
pace yourself a little bit.
Yeah. We love the passion that they bring to it. So Steve, so let's say somebody sees this interview and they enjoy the information that you're talking about, and they want to invite you on their platform, CNBC, Forbes magazine, who knows, BBC, they want to contact you. What's the best way people can contact you for more information or just to have you on their platform if they choose to?
You want me to tell you that or just in general or?
Yeah, just in general.
I mean, I'm retired now, so, I've got an email, I've got a phone number, whatever. I would say they could just ask you, and then you could provide that to them.
Yeah,
Does that work?
I make sure the contact information.
I don't have an organization. It's just me.
Yeah, I'm gonna make sure I put your email in the description, so if anybody want to be able to contact you,
that's fine.
Because I say that because you are a wealth of knowledge and experience, and I'm saying this for others. He has the wealth of knowledge and experience, and has the information and the will to do it. So just reach out. If you're gonna reach out, do it right. So
that's right. And I don't work for a company anymore, so I don't know. I'm not representing them.
Right.
So there are things I can actually say now that that I'm not restricted, because and that's one of the things too, when we're given information as a pharmaceutical company, as a representative of that pharmaceutical company, we have to not only give all the positive, the results of our studies, but we also have to balance that with, okay, but if you have patients that are blah, 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 or they're taking this, this, and this, they can't, in other words, you have to make sure that there's a balance of the pluses and the minuses when we're given that. And somebody's coming in just telling you it's the best thing in the world and there's nothing to worry about, and don't believe them.
Right.
But you guys do the same thing, and that's part of the educational pamphlets and things. I mean, ask for those as a patient. If you don't have that, and if you don't understand everything that's in there, bring it in, and that's a good thing to use with your healthcare practitioner to ask questions from.
And one of the most powerful things you said was ask questions. As the patient,
absolutely.
You have the right to ask questions because we work for you.
Yep.
We work for you. So, Mr. Steve Mikell, the living legend, and we appreciate you. We definitely appreciate you, and I'm sure over your 40 years you've touched so many people. So this is also part of us making sure we give you your flowers to your face and why you stay, because I just feel like we should do things like that, celebrate people who have greatly helped to improve our community and our people. So this is a part of our celebration to you, and a thank you for all that you've done, a lifetime of work for these people. So thank you.
And thank you, Joe, and thanks to Mathias and everybody there at Neighborhood. You guys will do a jam up job, man.
Thank you.
Do it right.
Thank you. And people, this is how we do it. We make friends with some of the greatest people around. And that's why you need to tune into this podcast. And remember, Mind, Your Body, and Soul is an educational podcast that focuses on all things health related to help our listeners learn more about various health topics they may not have access to. We seek to inform, empower, uplift, and mobilize our listeners to become the healthiest versions of themselves. Remember, our website, www.nmcpodcast.com, as well as our parent website, at neighborhoodmedicalcenter.org. We're also on Anchor, Breaker, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and of course our home right here on YouTube, Neighborhood Medical Center. So with that being said, we will see you people next week.